A bride is forced to uncover a shocking truth on her wedding day. She isn't who she thought she was. Her name, her family, even her twin sister's betrayal unravel into a dark conspiracy tied to power, lies, and a forgotten past. Alina's journey from a pawn to a fearless heroine will leave you breathless. Where are you watching from? Comment below. I'd love to know. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next incredible story. The ballroom shimmered with golden light, its crystal chandeliers casting prismatic glows onto the marble floor. Guests dressed in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos buzzed with excitement, sipping champagne and commenting on the opulence of the Maddox-Halden wedding. A string quartet played softly in the background while waiters moved like clockwork, balancing silver trays of hors d'oeuvres and chilled cocktails. But beneath the glamour, Alina Maddox stood frozen behind the heavy silk curtains just outside the grand entrance to the ceremony hall. Her breath trembled, hands cold as ice beneath the veil that wasn't meant for her. The dress clung to her body like a lie, a gown that belonged to her sister, not her. Sierra should have been the one walking down that aisle. It was Sierra's wedding, Sierra's plan, Sierra's world. Except Sierra was gone. "I swear, Alina, if you don't do this, everything will fall apart," her sister had hissed the night before. "Do it for me. One day. That's all I need." Alina had refused, at first. But then Sierra played her trump card. "You owe me," she'd whispered. "After everything I've sacrificed to protect you, the least you can do is put on a damn dress and smile." Now, Alina's stomach twisted into knots as the wedding planner gestured for the music to shift. The processional had started. Bridesmaids filed down the aisle. Marcus Halden stood at the altar with his hands clasped, unaware that the woman approaching him would not be who he thought she was. Alina had never wanted this life. While Sierra bathed in attention and privilege, Alina preferred solitude. Her books, her art, her quiet evenings. But somehow, she had always been pulled into Sierra's orbit, like a planet too close to a dying star, and now she was being burned alive by it. The doors swung open. The guest stood. Her legs moved forward, each step a betrayal. Her eyes locked on Marcus, the man she had secretly loved from afar, even as he belonged to someone else. His gaze softened the moment he saw her. His expression, genuine, filled with warmth, nearly made her stop. "He thinks you're her." The thought screamed inside her mind as the officiant began the vows. The scent of lilies filled the air, and her heart pounded louder than the music. Her voice cracked when she said, "I do," but no one seemed to notice. Marcus gently slid the ring onto her trembling finger, his smile so sincere it made her chest ache. When he leaned in to kiss her, she almost pulled away. But his lips brushed hers, soft and reverent, and for one horrifying second, she let herself pretend it was real. By the time the applause roared and the crowd erupted into cheers, Alina knew there was no going back. Later that evening, tucked away in the honeymoon suite of the Halden family estate, Alina sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing the gown, her hands clenched in her lap. The diamond ring sparkled mockingly on her finger. The suite was breathtaking, an elegant blend of old-world charm and modern luxury, with a panoramic view of the cliffs overlooking the ocean. But she didn't see any of it. She only saw the future unraveling like a spool of silk thread, a future built on a foundation of lies. Marcus stepped out from the bathroom, his tuxedo jacket discarded and shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He looked at her, a curious softness in his eyes. "You okay?" he asked, walking toward her. She forced a smile. Just tired? It's been a long day. He sat beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. You were perfect today. I mean it. I've never seen you look more beautiful. The words made her chest tighten. This wasn't her life. This wasn't her moment. She tried to look away, but he gently tilted her chin back. You know, for a second during the ceremony, I thought something was off, like you were somewhere else. She swallowed hard. Weddings are emotional. I guess it just hit me. He nodded slowly, accepting the answer. Or pretending to. We don't have to do anything tonight. If you're not ready, I just want you to know that I love you. That I'll wait for you, however long it takes. Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away quickly. Thank you, she whispered. Marcus leaned forward and kissed her forehead. Get some rest. I'll be here when you wake up. He stood and walked to the balcony, leaving her alone with her guilt. That night, Alina couldn't sleep. Every creak in the walls, every gust of wind outside the windows sounded like Sierra's voice returning to haunt her. Her sister hadn't responded to texts or calls all day. No one knew where she'd gone. Only that she had vanished on the eve of her own wedding, and left Alina to pick up the pieces. She replayed Sierra's words again and again. All day. But what happened after that? What was the plan? Alina had agreed under the impression that this charade would last 24 hours. Yet now she sat in a strange bed beside a man who believed he had married someone else. What if Sierra never came back? The next morning, Alina awoke to the scent of coffee and fresh croissants. Marcus had prepared breakfast himself, laid it out on the small table beside the window. He greeted her with a grin and a steaming cup. I thought we could eat here, he said. Private honeymoon breakfast. She tried to match his enthusiasm, sitting across from him and sipping carefully. This is perfect. He watched her with that same loving gaze, and it shattered her resolve. He didn't deserve this. He deserved the truth. But how do you tell a man that the woman he married isn't the woman he loved? Before she could speak, Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Alina froze. This was supposed to be your wedding gift, he said. But I forgot with all the excitement yesterday. He opened it to reveal a delicate sapphire bracelet, the blue matching the color of her eyes. Eyes that were identical to Sierra's. It belonged to my mother, he explained. She told me to give it to the woman who made me believe in love again. Tears welled up instantly. She had no right to this. Her lips parted to tell him the truth, but then his phone rang. He glanced at the screen. My assistant. I should take this. Give me 1 sec. As he stepped into the other room, Alina reached for the bracelet, cradling it like a sacred object. Her heart thundered. She had to end this. She stood, ready to confess everything. But then a message flashed across her phone screen. Unknown number. If you tell him, everything falls apart. You'll destroy more lives than you know. Keep quiet, for your sake and his. Her breath caught. Was it Sierra? She texted back immediately. Where are you? What's going on? No reply. Her fingers shook as she slid the phone into her pocket. The room swirled around her. Was she being watched? Tracked? Had Sierra planned this from the start? The door opened again. Marcus returned, smiling. Crisis averted, he said, then noticed her pale face. You okay? She nodded quickly. Just overwhelmed. He walked over and wrapped his arms around her. "It's going to be okay, whatever it is. I'm here." Alina closed her eyes, resting her head on his chest. His heartbeat was steady, calming, but her own thudded with dread. Whatever Sierra had started, whatever game this was, it had only just begun, and Alina, the substitute bride, was now tangled in a web of secrets that might not let her go. She whispered, barely audible, "I'm sorry, Marcus." He didn't hear her, but one day soon he would. The sunlight streamed through the arched windows of the Halden estate, spilling golden warmth across the polished floors. Alina stood in the vast kitchen, wrapped in a silk robe that still bore Sierra's initials embroidered on the sleeve. Her hand trembled as she poured herself a cup of coffee. The scent, dark roast, Sierra's favorite, nearly made her gag. Everything here reminded her of the woman she was pretending to be. It had been 2 days since the wedding, and still no word from Sierra. Not a single call, not a single text. The unknown number from the night before had gone silent after that one chilling message. Every time Alina tried to call back, the line rang once and cut out. She tried reaching Vivian, her adoptive mother, but the calls were forwarded directly to voicemail. Something was wrong. Alina could feel it, like a low hum of dread vibrating in her bones. Marcus, ever the devoted husband, hadn't noticed a thing. Or if he had, he was choosing not to push. He'd been tender, patient, doting, bringing her breakfast in bed, guiding her on evening walks through the gardens, asking about her favorite books, her favorite music. It broke her heart every time he looked at her like she was his world. Because he didn't know the truth, he'd married a lie. She wanted to come clean. Every moment of silence was a growing debt she didn't know how to repay. That morning she sat across from him in the sunroom as he typed away on his laptop. He was reviewing code for his tech startup, casually sipping from his coffee, looking every bit like the future billionaire the media made him out to be. "Marcus," she began softly. He looked up, eyes instantly attentive. "Yeah, babe?" Her throat clenched. "Have you heard from Vivian lately?" He frowned. "Your mom?" "No. Should I have?" Alina hesitated. "No, just wondering. She usually checks in, you know." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded slowly. Maybe she's giving us space." "Maybe," Alina echoed, but her voice lacked conviction. Later that afternoon, while Marcus was out meeting an investor, Alina roamed the halls of the estate like a ghost. The place was massive, 4 stories tall, wings that stretched endlessly, libraries filled with books untouched, art pieces collected from every continent. Every corner whispered Sierra's presence, her perfume lingering in the closets, her shoes still perfectly aligned by the dressing room door, her name etched on drawers, her photographs, dozens of them, scattered in elaborate gold frame. It was her house, her life, and Alina was drowning in it. She found herself drawn to the East Wing. An older part of the estate Marcus had mentioned belonged to the Halden family for generations. Dust lingered in the air, and the wooden floor creaked underfoot. As she wandered deeper, she came across a narrow staircase that led to a small attic door. Curiosity nudged her. The door groaned as she pushed it open, revealing a storage space filled with boxes labeled in careful handwriting. Some were Marcus's childhood mementos. Others were labeled Maddox. Confidential. Alina froze. She walked slowly toward the box, her fingers trembling as she lifted the lid. Inside were envelopes, old journals, and official-looking documents. The first thing she noticed was her name, Alina Grace Maddox, birth certificate. Except something was off. Her name had been scribbled over in faint blue ink, replaced by Alina Grace L. Grace, the Maddox part, hastily added later in darker ink. Confused, she pulled out a manila envelope with sealed medical records. The hospital logo bore a name she didn't recognize. Inside were ultrasound scans, psychiatric notes, and court orders. One page stood out. A temporary guardianship order, naming Vivian Maddox as the legal guardian of twin girls after the biological mother was declared unfit due to a neurological breakdown. Alina sat down hard, the wind knocked out of her. Twin girls, declared unfit, neurological breakdown. She flipped through more pages and came across a black and white photo paper-clipped to a patient file. A woman with hollow eyes stared blankly into the camera. The file was marked, Lena Grace, patient 412A. Her hand flew to her mouth. Lena Grace. The name matched the initials from the letter. L.L. Sierra wasn't just hiding. She had run from something far bigger than Alina realized. Vivian had told her they were adopted, that her real mother had died in childbirth. She'd told Alina she was lucky to have been chosen, that Vivian had rescued her, cared for her, loved her like a real daughter. Lie. Vivian had taken them, Alina and Sierra, from a mentally unstable woman and never told them the truth. She'd forged identities, fabricated histories, and Alina had swallowed every word of it. She didn't even know who she really was. Tears blurred her vision as she closed the box. Her entire life had been stolen. Or hidden. She didn't know which was worse. That night, when Marcus returned home, she pretended nothing had changed. She made dinner, laughed at his jokes, kissed him goodnight, then waited until he was asleep before slipping into the hallway with the file tucked beneath her arm. She needed answers. She needed Sierra. The next morning, she made her way to the Maddox family townhouse in the city. She used the spare key Sierra had given her years ago during college. The place was immaculate, untouched. Sierra's signature red lipstick sat beside the mirror. Her handbags hung perfectly aligned in the walk-in closet, but something about the space felt staged. Elena checked the drawers, then the safe Sierra had once casually mentioned. The password hadn't changed. 423. Their shared birthday. Inside was a small stack of cash, 2 passports, one for Sierra, one for someone named Serena Graves, and a burner phone. She powered it on. There were only 2 text threads. One was with an unsaved number. The latest message read, "I bought you time. Now you owe me." The second was with a contact named D. The conversation was brief but chilling. "Do you have access to the Halden server yet?" "Sierra, not yet. Working on it. Once the wedding's over, I'll be in." "Tick-tock, princess." Alina dropped the phone like it burned her. Sierra hadn't disappeared in fear. She had been playing a dangerous game. Using Alina. Using Marcus, and possibly working with someone to infiltrate his company. Her phone buzzed. Marcus's name lit up the screen. She didn't answer. Instead, she sat down on Sierra's pristine couch, breathing hard. She was no longer just a pawn in a wedding day mistake. She was in the middle of something much larger, something dangerous. A knock on the door startled her. Peeking through the peephole, she saw a delivery man holding a small envelope. When she opened the door, he handed it to her silently and walked away. The envelope was unmarked, but the handwriting was familiar. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Don't trust Marcus. He's not who you think. Watch the mirror in the study at midnight. As Alina stood there, frozen, heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what scared her more, that Sierra was lying or that she was telling the truth. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just about love anymore. It was about secrets, and the kind that didn't stay buried for long. The hospital was tucked away on the edge of town, nestled behind a grove of unkempt trees and an iron fence laced with rust. It didn't look like the kind of place anyone went to get better. The paint on the walls was peeling, and the gravel path to the entrance crunched under Alina's heels like bones. She stood outside the entrance for a long moment, her hands stuffed into her coat pockets, the manila envelope pressed tightly to her chest. Her heart beat in her ears. The wind was cold and sharp, pulling loose strands of hair from her braid. It took all of her will to keep her feet planted where they were. The receptionist inside barely looked up when Alina entered. A woman with dull gray eyes and a bored expression handed her a clipboard, asking for a name. Alina paused. "Lena Grace," she said softly. The receptionist's gaze flicked up. "Family?" Alina hesitated again. "Yes." "Relate?" She swallowed hard. "Daughter." The woman nodded without further question, as if she'd heard that kind of confession 1,000 times before. She picked up the phone, whispered something, and then motioned toward the elevator. "Third floor, room 312. "She's usually quiet," the receptionist added, not unkindly, "but she has moments." Alina didn't reply. She couldn't. Her throat had gone dry. The ride up was silent, but inside her chaos reigned. Every second felt like her stomach was twisting tighter and tighter. Could this really be her mother? The woman she had been told was dead? Who had lived in her memory as a ghost, a vague shadow, a name with no face? And if Lena Grace really was her mother, what did that make Vivian? What did that make Sierra? The hallway was lined with muted greens and flickering fluorescence. A nurse at the desk looked up, recognized her arrival, and pointed her silently toward the last door on the left. Room 312. Alina's fingers trembled as she reached for the handle. For a moment she simply listened. No sound came from inside. No sobs. No muttering. Just silence. She opened the door. The room was small and dimly lit by a narrow window. The bed was tucked in the corner, beneath a faded watercolor painting of a bird. In the chair by the window sat a woman, her hair silver and wispy, braided loosely down her back. She stared outside, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her face was lined with time, but even from behind there was a fragility to her posture that tugged something deep inside Alina's chest. "Lena," Alina whispered, her voice barely above a breath. The woman didn't turn at first. Alina stepped closer. "Lena Grace?" Slowly, the woman turned her head. Her eyes, clouded by years but not entirely vacant, met Alina's. She blinked once. Twice. Then a small smile touched her lips. "You came back," she said. Alina felt her knees weaken. "You remember me?" Lena's smile faded, replaced by a soft confusion. "You're Sierra, aren't you?" Alina opened her mouth, but no words came out. She nodded without thinking. "Of course you are," Lena said, turning her gaze back to the window. "You always were the bold one. You always came back." Alina didn't correct her. Not yet. Instead, she pulled the chair from the corner and sat beside her. The room smelled faintly of lavender and antiseptic. A small clock ticked above the door. I've been trying to find you, Alina said softly. Lena gave a small nod. They told me I had daughters, twins, but I only ever see you in dreams now. I don't remember the other one's name. Alina's heart ached. It's Alina, she offered quietly. Lena blinked. That's a lovely name. A lump formed in Alina's throat. They took you away, Lena whispered. There was screaming. I tried to hold on, but they dragged me. I remember white lights and pain, then silence. Do you remember who took us? Alina asked. Lena turned to her again, her brows furrowed in concentration. A woman, rich, cold hands, always smelled like gardenias. She said I was unfit. She told the court I was dangerous. Vivian, Alina breathed. Yes, Lena said, as if that name had haunted her dreams. She took you. Said she would raise you properly. Said I was sick. Said you'd be better off. Alina clutched the envelope in her hands. You weren't sick, were you? Lena gave a bitter laugh. They made me sick. Do you know what it feels like to forget your own children? To be drugged until your memories feel like fog? Tears welled in Alina's eyes. I'm so sorry. The older woman studied her face, and something in her eyes shifted. A flicker of clarity. You're not Sierra, are you? Alina froze. You're the other one, Lena said gently. You're Alina. Alina's tears fell freely then. She nodded, biting her lip. Yes, I'm Alina. I didn't know. I thought, all these years, I thought you were dead. Lena reached out, brushing a knuckle down Alina's cheek. You have my eyes. Alina broke into a sob, leaning into her touch. They sat there like that for a long time. No words, just quiet and something ancient being repaired between them. Later, the nurse brought tea. Lena sipped it slowly, while Alina watched her, memorizing every detail. The slope of her nose, the delicate tremor in her hands, the way her eyes searched every face like it might vanish any second. You know where Sierra is? Lena asked suddenly. Alina hesitated. No, she disappeared after her wedding. She made me take her place. Lena's brows furrowed. That sounds like her. You knew her well. She was always different. Shiny on the outside, but hard to hold. She never liked to be second, not even by a breath. Alina looked down. She's in trouble, I think. Lena nodded slowly. She's always been in trouble. She just never believed it would catch up. They sat in silence again until Lena's eyes began to drift closed. She needs help, Alina said softly. Lena smiled sleepily. So do you, sweetheart. I don't know who I am anymore. You're mine, she whispered, slipping into sleep. That's all that matters. Alina left the hospital in a daze, the cool afternoon air hitting her like a slap. Her phone buzzed the moment she reached the sidewalk, a message from another unknown number. You're getting too close. Back off or everyone burns. Her pulse skyrocketed. She looked up and scanned the street, but no one stood out. Cars drove by. People walked their dogs. A man in a gray hoodie paused near a lamppost, then disappeared down an alley. Back at the estate, Marcus was waiting for her, standing on the veranda with a glass of wine in one hand and a file folder in the other. "You were gone a while," he said, watching her. "I needed some air." He held up the folder. "This came for you, delivered by hand." Alina took it, still rattled. Inside was a photograph, grainy and black and white. A young Lena, beautiful and wild-eyed, standing with a man whose face had been scratched out, on the back. "He was the reason they took you." Alina's hands trembled. Marcus came closer, concern etched on his face. "What is it?" She looked up, swallowing hard. "Do you know anyone named Damien?" His eyes narrowed slightly. "Why?" "Because I think Sierra was working with him, and I think she used our wedding to get access to something in your company." Marcus exhaled slowly. "That name. I've heard it before, but not in the business world. More off-grid, underground." Her stomach dropped. Alina turned and looked out over the Halden property, the gardens, the staff, the illusion of safety. "I think we're in more danger than we realize." It was just after midnight when the silence shattered. The estate's private security system blipped a red light on the main panel. Alina was already awake, sitting in the corner of the bedroom with her knees pulled to her chest, her mind racing with thoughts of Lena, of Sierra, of Damien, and the way his name felt like poison on her tongue. She hadn't told Marcus about the threatening message yet. She didn't know how. She barely understood it herself. Every step forward only unearthed more lies. The beeping pulled her from her thoughts. Seconds later, Marcus stormed out of the bathroom, towel slung over his shoulder. "Did you hear that?" he asked, already moving to the tablet near the bed, checking the perimeter cameras. Alina scrambled to her feet. "What is it?" He tapped through the live feeds with a surgeon's precision. West Gate was triggered. Could be an animal. Sometimes deer cross through the sensors. But when the camera feed loaded, Alina's breath caught. Standing just outside the gate, bathed in moonlight, was Sierra. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her platinum blonde hair was tied in a messy braid, and her expensive coat was torn at the sleeve. She was barefoot. Even from the grainy footage, Alina could see the strain in her posture, the desperation in the way she kept glancing behind her. Marcus narrowed his eyes. "Is that—" "Yes," Alina said, already moving for the door. "It's Sierra." By the time they reached the front steps, Sierra was halfway up the driveway. Alina raced toward her, the cold biting into her skin. "Sierra!" she called out, her voice both a demand and a plea. Sierra stumbled to a stop, gasping. I didn't know where else to go." Alina caught her sister's arms, anchoring her before she could collapse. "Where have you been? What's going on?" Sierra looked over her shoulder. "He found out. Damien knows you took my place." Marcus stepped forward, his tone sharp. "What the hell are you talking about?" Sierra's eyes flicked to him. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I just needed time to get out. To disappear. Damien. He promised me protection, but he lied." Alina felt like she was spinning. "You told me it would be one day. You said I'd just be standing in for you. Then you vanished. Do you even realize what you left me with?" Sierra's expression crumbled. "I didn't think it would go this far." "You never do," Alina snapped. Marcus stepped between them. "Someone tell me what's going on." Sierra's hands trembled as she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a USB drive. "He wanted this. It has encryption keys tied to Halden systems. Backdoor access to your tech infrastructure. Marcus stiffened. How the hell did he get that? I stole it, she whispered, shame thick in her voice. I was going to give it to him after the wedding, when he got me out of the country. Alina felt her stomach twist. You married him under my name and tried to rob him? Sierra nodded. But then I saw how he looked at you, the way he kissed you. He never looked at me like that, and I realized maybe you were better at being me than I ever was. Marcus's jaw clenched. So, this was all a setup. Tears welled in Sierra's eyes. Yes, but I couldn't go through with it. Damien got impatient. He sent men after me. That's why I came back. Alina's heart pounded. You're telling me Damien wants that drive, and you just brought it here? To the one place he knows you might run to? Sierra nodded miserably. I didn't know what else to do. Marcus turned to Alina. We need to secure the estate. Now. The next few hours blurred into motion. Marcus mobilized his private security team, reinforcing gates, activating silent alarms, ordering additional guards on site. Alina sat in the study, clutching a blanket around her shoulders, her thoughts a whirlwind of betrayal and fear. Sierra sat across from her, sipping tea with trembling hands. You used me, Alina said, not even trying to hide the ache in her voice. I didn't have a choice, Sierra whispered. He would have killed me. And what about me? Alina asked. What about the life you handed me like a mask? You made me stand there and pretend to be you. I signed marriage documents under your name. I lied to Marcus. I lied to myself. Sierra looked down. I thought you'd back out. But I didn't. And you let me walk down that aisle. A long silence stretched between them. Then Sierra finally spoke again. Do you know what it's like, being the twin everyone expects more from? The beautiful one, the ambitious one, but still never enough. Alina blinked. You had everything. I had pressure, Sierra corrected. I had expectations so high they nearly suffocated me. When Damien came along, he saw me as something useful. Not perfect, not flawless, just dangerous. And I liked it. Until he started treating me like property. Alina leaned forward. So, now what? You think you can just come back, drop this mess on our doorstep, and walk away? Sierra met her eyes. No, I want to fix it. If I give him the drive, he'll keep coming. But if we destroy it and expose him, we burn everything he's built. You're assuming he won't burn us first, Marcus said from the doorway. Both women turned. He looked exhausted, fury simmering just beneath the surface. Your name is still on that marriage license, he said to Sierra. Legally, I'm your husband. That means this whole thing, what Alina and I feel, it's a mess. One that could blow up in all our faces if we don't tread carefully. Sierra stood slowly. Then let's make it right. I'll go to the authorities. No, Marcus snapped. If you do that, Damien will know we're coming. He'll retaliate. We need proof. Something that ties him to the drive, to the attack on you, to everything. Alina stood. Then we use Sierra as bait. Sierra's eyes widened. Are you insane? You started this, Alina said coldly. You're the only one he trusts enough to meet in person. Set up a meeting. We record everything. No. He'll see through me. Marcus walked over, lowering his voice. Then make him underestimate you. Use what he taught you against him." Sierra hesitated. Then, slowly, she nodded. The plan was simple. Sierra would lure Damien to a neutral location under the pretense of handing over the drive. Marcus had a secure space at a penthouse suite downtown, lined with surveillance tech and soundproofed walls. They'd set it up to appear like Sierra had stolen the drive back and was coming to make a deal. Alina stayed behind, but her nerves were live wires. She paced the length of the estate, fingers knotted, eyes darting to every corner of the property, like Damien's men might already be there. She tried calling Vivian again. Voicemail. Then, just as the sun began to rise, her phone buzzed. A single line of text from Marcus. "He showed up. We have what we need. Coming home." She exhaled for the first time in hours. But relief was short-lived. Minutes later, a second message came in. From an unknown number. "You think it's over. It's just begun." And beneath that, a picture. Of Vivian, bound to a chair, eyes wide with terror. Al-Anon screamed. The sound tore through the estate like a warning bell. And for the first time since this began, she realized something horrifying. Vivian had secrets too, and someone wasn't done with them yet. The message sat on the screen like a wound. "You think it's over. It's just begun." Alina stared at the photo of Vivian, her adoptive mother, bound to a chair in what looked like an old warehouse. Bare concrete walls, one flickering bulb above her head, and a jagged streak of blood trailing from her hairline down her cheek. Her eyes were wide, frantic, her mouth was gagged. The image was low-res, but unmistakable. Her scream had brought Marcus racing up the stairs, followed closely by Sierra, who was still breathless from the sting operation they'd just completed. "What happened?" Marcus demanded, grabbing her shoulders. Alina shoved the phone at him with trembling hands. "Vivian, they have her." Sierra took one look at the screen and paled. No, this wasn't part of the deal. Damien said if I gave him the drive, he'd leave my family alone." Alina whirled on her. "You trusted him after everything?" "I didn't have a choice," Sierra shouted, her voice cracking. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tight. "This changes everything. He knows we set him up. The drive was a trap. The meeting was recorded. Now he's retaliating." Alina turned away, clutching her arms. "We have to find her. She's not innocent, but she doesn't deserve this." Sierra's voice was cold. "She forged court documents. She had our mother institutionalized. She raised us," Alina shot back. "She may be twisted, but she's still part of our story." Marcus exhaled, already pulling out his phone to call Don Rafael Calderon, his grandfather. The man was a living legend in the business world, but beneath the clean-cut empire of innovation and tech, he was also rumored to be one of the most powerful underground forces on the East Coast. Marcus had never leaned on that side of his family, until now. "We need help," Marcus said when the call connected. "I'm cashing in that favor." A pause. Then a gravelly voice answered, "Tell me everything." Within the hour, Don Rafael's men arrived. Sleek black SUVs pulled into the estate driveway like shadows, unloading men in suits who moved with military precision. They carried cases of equipment, trackers, encrypted comms, portable surveillance drones. Don Rafael himself didn't come. He never did unless it was necessary. But he sent his top handler, Hector Ruiz, a tall, scar-faced man with a voice like iron and eyes that never blinked. Alina stood with Marcus and Sierra as Hector analyzed the photo. "We've seen this location before," he said, pointing to a faint graffiti tag in the background. "Old meat-packing plant in Red Hook. Shut down 5 years ago." "How secure is it?" Marcus asked. "Not very. Damien's reckless. He moves fast and loud." "That's his weakness." Olena's heart was thudding. "Then let's go." "No," Hector said, glancing at her. "You don't go anywhere near this. You're the reason he's playing this game now, you and your sister." Seer folded her arms. "We didn't ask for this." "No," Hector replied, "but you escalated it. Now it's not just personal, it's business." Alina stepped forward. "We want her back alive. That's the only condition." Hector's eyes flicked to Marcus. "You sure she's worth it?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "She's family." That word hit Alina harder than she expected. Family. Even now, with everything they knew, Vivian's lies, her betrayal, Marcus still counted her as one of them. Sierra, however, looked away. Plans were made swiftly. Drones were dispatched over Red Hook. Thermal imaging confirmed human presence inside the warehouse. At least 6 signatures. One matched Vivian's body shape and height. Another appeared to be pacing, possibly Damien. At dawn, the operation launched. Alina wasn't allowed to go. Neither was Sierra. They watched the live feed from the surveillance van parked just outside the estate gates. It was agonizing. Every step the operatives took was silent and coordinated. They breached through the back, sweeping the rooms with tactical precision. Then, "Target secured," a voice whispered over comms. On the screen they saw Vivian, her face bruised, her mouth still gagged, being gently unbound by one of Raphael's men. Then the feed glitched. "What happened?" Sierra asked sharply. The screen flickered again. One of the operatives cursed. "It's a trap." An explosion rocked the feed. Static. Alina gasped. "No, no, no, no." Sierra clutched her hand. "What just happened?" Another voice came through the comm. "Folk." Then, silence. It took 27 minutes before the surviving team members returned. Vivian had been recovered, alive. But 2 of Raphael's men were dead, 3 others critically wounded. Damien had escaped. Vivian, shaken and barely conscious, was loaded into an ambulance under heavy guard. Later that night, Alina sat beside her hospital bed. Vivian's eyes fluttered open. For a long time she said nothing. Then, in a voice hoarse from screaming, she whispered, "I thought I'd never see you again." Alina stared at her, the guilt and resentment warring inside her. "Why did you do it?" she asked softly. "Why did you take us from her?" Vivian swallowed hard. "Because I couldn't have children of my own. Because your mother was unstable and they were going to split you up in foster care. Because I thought I was saving you." "No," Alina said, her voice trembling. "You were saving yourself." Vivian closed her eyes. A tear slid down her cheek. "Yes," she admitted, "but I did love you, both of you. I raised you the best I could." Alina sat back, tears pooling in her own eyes. "You lied to us." "I know," Vivian whispered. "And now, he's going to kill all of us." "No," Alina said, standing. "Now, we fight back." That night, Marcus received a call from Don Raphael. His voice was quieter than usual, heavy with meaning. "You've crossed a line, grandson," he said. "Damien struck against my people. That makes him my problem now." "I don't want more bloodshed," Marcus replied. "You don't have a choice, Raphael said. You were never going to be able to live two lives. Now, the choice is made for you. Marcus glanced at Alina, asleep on the couch, her body curled up, exhausted beyond reason. What happens next? He asked. Next, Raphael said, you become who you were meant to be. The following morning, Marcus called a private meeting. Alina, Sierra, Hector, Raphael on video. There's no turning back now, Marcus said, folding his hands on the table. Damien has gone too far. We're going to dismantle everything he's built, piece by piece. We have the data from the drive. We have the footage from the sting. But we don't have him, Sierra said. Yet, Marcus replied. He's going to try again. He'll come after Alina. Or you. Or both. Alina sat up straight. Then let's make sure he finds what he's looking for. Sierra blinked. Are you saying use us as bait again? No, Alina said, her voice steady. This time, we go on offense. We lure him in. And we end it. Raphael's voice came through the screen, darkly amused. My dear, you've got more fire than I expected. I learned it from watching people like you, she said. He chuckled. Well then, welcome to the family. Sierra looked at Alina, something like admiration flickering in her gaze. You're not the same girl I left at that altar. No, Alina agreed, eyes burning. I'm not. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Inside, the war had already begun. The storm broke just before dawn. Wind howled against the tall windows of the Heldon estate, and rain battered the roof like war drums. The air was heavy with static, like the whole world was bracing for a reckoning. Alina stood in front of her bedroom mirror, staring at the reflection she barely recognized anymore. Her eyes were sharper, her jaw set tighter. Gone was the timid woman who once walked into this mansion wearing someone else's name. Now, she was herself. And she was ready to face the storm. In the adjacent room, Sierra paced the floor like a caged animal. She had agreed to help, not out of guilt, not entirely, but because she knew this ended only one of two ways. They either exposed Damien, or they died trying. The plan had changed. No more hiding, no more reacting. They would go after Damien's operations directly, beginning with the very source of his strength, his network of blackmail files and secret offshore accounts. If they dismantled his empire from the inside, he'd have nowhere left to hide. The only way to get to those files was through a device Damien kept with him at all times, a modified crypto phone, locked by biometric access and a shifting 6-digit code that changed hourly. Untouchable. Unless, of course, you had someone close enough to distract him long enough to clone the signal. Someone he trusted, or thought he did. I still can't believe you're going through with this, Alina said, standing in the doorway of the guest room. Sierra glanced up, her expression unreadable. You said it yourself. He thinks, I'm useful. Let's prove him right. They met with Marcus and Hector in the war room, a repurposed library now filled with monitors, communications relays, and blueprints of every property Damien had ever been connected to. On the central screen was the warehouse footage from the sting, still grainy but clear enough to see Damien's face contorted in fury as he realized he'd been set up. We've tracked Damien to a private compound in upstate New York, Hector began, pointing to a satellite image. He moves between locations every 72 hours. This place, Edgefield, is his fallback point. He's paranoid, but it's heavily fortified. Don't expect Sierra to show up there, Marcus said. Won't he? Alina asked. Sierra shrugged. If I text him, say I stole the backup drive back from Marcus, say I want out, he'll bite. I might kill you on sight, Marcus said flatly. He won't, Sierra said. He needs me. Or he still thinks he does. Alina crossed her arms. And what happens once you're inside? Sierra smirked, a little too calm. I give him the drive. I flirt, act scared, buy you time. You clone the data remotely. Once that's done, I'll give the signal. And if something goes wrong? Alina asked. Sierra looked at her. Then it's been nice knowing you. That evening, Sierra dressed in all black, tight pants, leather jacket, and crimson lipstick. It was armor, in a way. The same look she'd used to seduce, manipulate, survive. It had worked before. It would have to work again. Marcus handed her a tracking bracelet disguised as a silver cuff. This transmits your location in real time. You get into trouble, press the clasp twice. We'll be 5 minutes out. Alina helped her twin fasten the bracelet. Their eyes met. So similar, yet worlds apart. You don't have to do this, Alina whispered. I do, Sierra said. For once in my life, I want to be the one who saves someone else. Alina didn't say anything. She just nodded, then pulled her sister into a tight hug. Don't get killed, she whispered. Sierra's voice broke. I'll do my best. The Edgefield compound was nestled between thick pine trees and fog-covered ridges. It looked more like a hunting lodge than a criminal hideout, but inside it was a fortress of steel and paranoia. Motion detectors, armed guards, reinforced steel walls. Sierra arrived alone, driving a vintage convertible she'd once stolen for a photo shoot and never returned. She pulled up to the gate, flashing her high beams twice. The agreed-upon signal. Moments later, the gate creaked open, and Damien's men stepped out of the shadows. One of them recognized her instantly. Miss Maddox, tell Damien I'm here to make a deal, she said, handing over her phone with the fake drive already inserted. They frisked her, roughly but not inappropriately. She was led into the main hall, where Damien sat on a velvet couch, swirling a glass of red wine. His expression was cold, calculating. Sierra, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I thought you were smarter than this. I am, she replied, striding forward, which is why I'm here. I want out. Damien tilted his head. Do you? She nodded. Marcus and Alina were never part of the plan. I didn't sign up for full-blown war. I want my payout, a new ID, and safe passage out of the country. You get your drive. We call it even. Damien studied her. Why should I believe you? Because if you don't, I'll walk out that door, and you'll lose your only chance at taking Marcus Halden down for good. He smiled then. There's the Sierra I remember. As he reached for the phone, Sierra leaned in, placing her hand on his thigh. Before you plug it in, show me something. Show me you're still in control. He chuckled. Still the queen of games. From across the compound, parked in a black surveillance van, Marcus watched the live feed from a hidden drone overhead. Alina sat beside him, her fingers trembling over the laptop as data streamed in. She's buying us time, she whispered. We're connected to his device. We just need another minute. Marcus watched the feed, his jaw locked. She's risking everything. Inside, Damien leaned back, admiring Sierra. You really are something, he said, his voice low. You know, I never really wanted Marcus's tech. I wanted to see if I could take something that mattered to him. You were just the bonus." Sierra's stomach turned, but she smiled sweetly. "And now you have both." He reached for the drive. Alina's screen pinged. "We're in," she said, breathless. "I'm cloning everything." Damien plugged in the drive. On the van's screen, lines of code burst across the interface. File after file downloaded. Blackmail, financial records, surveillance logs on dozens of public figures, including senators, CEOs, even judges. "Oh my God," Alina whispered. "He owns people." Marcus didn't look away. Not for long. Inside the compound, Damien was beginning to frown. "This encryption key looks off," he muttered. Sierra stood up slowly. "I wouldn't know. Tech was always Marcus's thing." Damien narrowed his eyes. "You didn't come here to hand me the drive, did you?" She smiled thinly. "Actually, I came to stall you." She pressed the cuff bracelet. Twice. Outside, alarms lit up. The security team stormed in like a wave of vengeance. Gunfire erupted. Smoke grenades detonated. In the chaos, Damien bolted for the back door. Sierra ducked behind a pillar, covering her ears against the noise. Marcus and Hector swept into the room, flanked by Raphael's men. "Clear," someone shouted. Marcus spotted Sierra and rushed to her side. "Are you okay?" She nodded, coughing. He ran, took a vehicle out back. Marcus turned to Hector. "Don't let him leave the state." Hector gave a dark grin. "He won't leave the driveway." 20 minutes later, it was over. Damien had been intercepted trying to flee through the woods. He was shot in the leg, tackled, and dragged back to the compound, bleeding and swearing. Sierra stood by the SUV, her arms crossed, watching as the man who once held her life in his hands was loaded into a black van like a caged animal. "You okay?" Alina asked softly, appearing beside her. Sierra gave a shaky laugh. "For the first time in years, yeah, I think I am." Alina reached for her hand, and this time, Sierra didn't pull away. Behind them, Marcus spoke quietly with Raphael's men, handing over the cloned files and finalizing the evidence trail. Damien would be exposed. His network dismantled, his allies scrambling to save themselves. It was done, but not over. As the sun rose over the charred compound, Alina turned to Marcus. "What happens now?" she asked. Marcus looked at her with tired but resolute eyes. "Now, we start rebuilding." Sierra joined them, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. "And maybe," she said, her voice steadier than it had been in a long time, "we start telling the truth." The following weeks unfolded like the calm after a hurricane, deceptive, disorienting, and too quiet. The compound raid had ended with Damien in custody, and Alina stood on the balcony of the Holden estate, a mug of chamomile tea cooling in her hands as the sun slipped beneath the horizon. The view was peaceful, almost surreal. Birds cut lazy circles in the sky. The garden below rustled in the wind. But peace, she was learning, came with echoes. Every quiet moment dragged up the memories. Her mother's bruised face in that hospital bed, Vivian's trembling hands, Sierra's tearful apology after the rescue, and Marcus, steady, unwavering, but holding back something he hadn't yet said. The door behind her creaked open. She turned her head to see Marcus stepping out, 2 fingers wrapped around a glass of bourbon, the other hand holding a folder thick with documents. "You've been out here for hours," he said gently, joining her at the railing. "I needed air," she replied. "I thought maybe you'd be inside reading your mother's journal." Alina hesitated. She'd found the old journal in Lena's hospital room a few days ago, buried beneath a tangle of blankets and worn clothes. The cover was cracked and the pages smelled like lavender and medicine. It detailed everything: her descent into the psychiatric ward, the drugs they'd used to control her, and Vivian's calculated betrayal. But there were also moments of light. Poems Lena had written to her daughters, memories of lullabies, dreams of a reunion that once felt impossible. "I read some of it," Alina said softly. "She used to sing to us, every night." Marcus placed the folder on the ledge beside her. "I want to show you something." Alina opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the top page. It was a property deed, then another, and another. 5 in total. "What is this?" "They're yours," he said. "Technically, the Maddox name is tied to offshore holdings Sierra didn't know about. I've transferred them to your name." She blinked. "Why would you do that?" "Because you deserve something that's yours. Not borrowed, not stolen. Yours." Her throat tightened. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he said. "And there's more." He turned toward her, his voice suddenly lower, more hesitant. "The marriage license. It's still legal, but it's under Sierra's name. We can annul it." Alina stared at him, heart thudding. "I don't want you to feel like you're living in her shadow," he added, "or mine. I want you to choose this. Choose us." Tears brimmed in her eyes. "I do. I've already chosen you." Marcus exhaled, the tension in his frame easing for the first time in weeks. He reached out, brushing a thumb across her cheek. "Then let's do it right this time." They held a quiet ceremony on the cliffs behind the estate, just the two of them, with Sierra and Lena as the only witnesses. Vivian had not been invited, not yet. She was still in protective custody, cooperating with federal authorities to avoid prosecution. Her presence hung over them like a distant thundercloud, but Alina had made peace with one truth. Forgiveness didn't have to mean reacceptance. Sierra wore a pale blue sundress and stood beside her sister with surprising calm, holding a small bouquet of white lilacs. She had changed. There was still sharpness in her, but the edges no longer cut indiscriminately. She had apologized to Lena, taken accountability in the press, and offered to testify against Damien's associates. Her future was uncertain, but she was no longer hiding from it. Lena, wrapped in a cashmere shawl, wept openly as Alina and Marcus exchanged vows. There were no grand speeches, no audience, no flashbulbs. Just truth. And a promise that this time, nothing would be built on deception. A week after the wedding, Alina walked the halls of the estate alone, her fingers brushing over framed photos, new ones now. One showed her and Lena in the garden, laughing. Another captured Sierra mid-smile, hair blowing across her face. And one, her favorite, was of her and Marcus, foreheads pressed together, eyes closed in a moment of stillness. She found Marcus in the study, where he was going over the last of the documents that would finalize the transfer of Damien's seized assets to the victims listed in his files. It was something Marcus had insisted on, not for publicity, for peace. Alina slid into the chair across from him. "Can I ask you something?" He looked up. "Anything. When you first found out I wasn't Sierra, why didn't you say anything?" He smiled faintly. "Because I knew, and still wanted you." She stared at him. "You knew?" Not the first day, he admitted. But after the first week, your laugh was different. Your eyes looked at me, not through me. I'd spent so long trying to love Sierra, trying to convince myself that the version of her I saw was real. And then you came along and, suddenly, I didn't have to try. Alina leaned forward, resting her chin in her palm. And you were okay with that? He gave a soft laugh. I was terrified. But I also knew that love doesn't always arrive the way we expect it. Sometimes it sneaks in through the back door while we're guarding the front. She smiled. Well, I'm glad it broke in. He reached for her hand. Me too. But peace, like always, came with warnings. 3 days later, Sierra received a call from an unknown number. She answered without hesitation. A voice spoke, calm and deep. You thought Damien was the top. He was just middle management. Sierra froze. Who is this? You're on a list now, Miss Maddox. You and your sister. You woke something up when you broke Damien. Something older. Something bigger. Sierra's blood ran cold. What do you want? Nothing, for now. Just a reminder. Every truth you uncover has a price. The line went dead. Sierra stared at the phone, her hand trembling. Alina found her an hour later, standing by the window, visibly pale. What's wrong? She asked. Sierra hesitated. Do you ever feel like we didn't end something, we just pulled the curtain back on something worse? Alina didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out at the storm clouds building again on the horizon and said softly, maybe. But this time, we'll face it together. Because now they weren't just survivors. They were sisters again. And together they were a force no one saw coming. The knock came at 3:17 a.m. It was soft, almost polite, but in the stillness of the early morning, it rang like thunder through the Halden estate. Alina sat bolt upright in bed, her breath catching. Marcus stirred beside her, already reaching for the drawer where he kept the emergency Glock. He glanced at her, eyes alert. You heard it too? She nodded, sliding from under the covers. They crept downstairs together, feet silent on the cold marble. The security system hadn't tripped. The exterior sensors hadn't blinked red. Whoever had come to their door had somehow bypassed the perimeter. Marcus glanced through the peephole and froze. What? Alina whispered. He opened the door. A man stood on the porch, older, lean, wearing a heavy black overcoat soaked from the light rain that had begun to fall. His salt and pepper beard was neatly trimmed, and his dark eyes held something neither hostile nor friendly, but unreadable. Between his gloved hands, he held a flat leather case. I believe, the man said smoothly, you've been expecting someone like me. Alina stepped forward cautiously. Who are you? The man's lips curved into something that could have been a smile. Call me Enoch. I work with continuity. Marcus raised the gun slightly. You have 10 seconds to explain before I decide you're not worth the conversation. Enoch remained unfazed. You've stirred a nest of old vipers, Mr. Halden. You assumed Damien was the disease. He was only a symptom. Alina's heartbeat stuttered. You were behind him? Enoch tilted his head. No. We watched him, monitored his moves. We let him think he had power. That's the point of men like him. They burn bright and fall fast. Meanwhile, we remain. What do you want? Marcus asked. Not your compliance, Enoch said calmly. Your awareness. He handed Marcus the leather case. Inside, you'll find files. Untraceable. Off-record. Old. Some of the names you'll recognize. Some you won't. But all of them have a stake in the chaos Damien left behind. Alina opened the case. Inside were yellowed documents, faded photographs, and a hard drive stamped with a seal she didn't recognize. An Ouroboros wrapping around a crown. "This is some secret society?" she asked, almost mockingly. "No," Enoch said. "It's much worse than that. It's a contract." Marcus frowned. "What kind of contract?" "Centuries old. Bound by blood, kept by legacy. What Damien touched, what you exposed, it was connected to something global, something quiet, something necessary." Alina's blood chilled. "Necessary for who?" "For balance," Enoch replied. "The world is not built on justice, Miss Maddox. It's built on the illusion of order. The people on this list, they decide when and how that illusion is preserved." "Why come to us now?" Marcus demanded. "Because you're now part of the story," Enoch said, "and because we would rather have you prepared than ignorant." He paused, glancing at Alina with something like regret. "Your mother's institutionalization, that wasn't just about control. It was about silence. She knew something once, something we couldn't let her remember." Aliena stepped forward. "Are you saying you're the reason Lena lost her mind?" "No," Enoch said, "but I was the reason they made sure she never found it again." The silence stretched long and cold. Then he turned to leave. "Wait," Marcus called out. "What happens if we don't play along?" Enoch paused on the top step, looking back. "Then, we hope you never matter enough to make us act." And then he was gone, swallowed by the night. Later, in the study, they laid out the contents of the case under dim lighting. The documents were dated as far back as the 1970s, detailing shadow operations tied to global market manipulation, political rigging, and mass surveillance experiments. One name came up more than once. E. Maddox. Sierra's and Alina's grandfather. They'd always believed he'd died before they were born, but now, reading the reports, it was clear. He hadn't died. He'd disappeared. Or rather, He was part of this, Alina whispered, holding up an old black and white photo of a man with dark eyes and an unsettling smirk. "He was one of them." Marcus nodded grimly. "Which means this goes deeper than any of us thought." They barely slept that night. By morning, Lena was awake early in the garden. She sat by the koi pond, her hands folded in her lap. Alina joined her, easing down beside her with the envelope containing the photo. "Do you remember him?" she asked. Lena's hand trembled as she lifted the image. She stared at it for a long time. Then she whispered, "He used to tell me stories about the ones who watched the world from the shadows. He said he was one of them once, that he left because he didn't want you girls raised in darkness." Alina swallowed hard. "They came last night." Lena closed her eyes. "Then it's starting again." "What is?" "The reckoning," her mother whispered. "Every few decades the wheel turns. The new blood gets curious. The old blood gets scared. And war begins. Not with armies, but with names." Sierra came home late that afternoon, fresh from a closed-door meeting with the FBI. She dropped her coat and went straight to the study where Marcus was analyzing the hard drive. "Anything useful?" she asked, leaning on the doorframe. He shook his head. "It's not data, it's a map." "A map to what?" "To leverage," Marcus said. "They've hidden copies of their insurance files. Blackmail, scandal footage, offshore backups, in 10 locations worldwide. If someone ever turned against them, they could threaten to expose the others." "Checks and balances," Sierra muttered. "More like mutual blackmail." Alina entered then, holding the last page of Lena's journal in her hand. "There's a name here," she said. "One she never spoke aloud. A place in Cambria." Marcus looked up. That's one of the coordinates on the map." Sierra raised an eyebrow. "So Lena knew about the stash?" "She didn't just know," Alina said. "She buried something there." 2 days later, they were on a private jet to Cambria, following the trail left in her mother's last entry. The estate there was remote, crumbling, tucked into the cliffs overlooking a jagged coast. Marcus stayed behind to coordinate their security perimeter while Alina and Sierra explored the grounds. It took them hours combing through overgrown gardens and rusted sheds before they found it, a hidden door beneath a stone slab behind the chapel. Inside was a narrow staircase leading into an underground vault. Alina's flashlight flickered as she moved down the steps. "You think we're walking into a trap?" Sierra followed closely, a Glock tucked at her back. "At this point, I'm hoping for it. At least it would make sense." The vault was small but meticulously preserved. On a central pedestal sat a locked chest. Carved into the surface was the Ouroboros seal. Alina reached into her pocket and pulled out Lena's ring, the one she'd always worn on her right hand, the one she'd stopped talking about after her first breakdown. It fit perfectly into the carved indentation on the lock. The chest clicked open. Inside were reels of old film, several thick folders, and a set of USB drives, all labeled with initials. Government officials, billionaires, tech moguls, and one labeled EM, Elias Maddox, their grandfather. Sierra picked it up slowly. "What do we do with this?" Alina's answer was steady. "We learn," because knowing the truth wasn't enough anymore. Now they had to understand the cost. When they returned home, Marcus was waiting in the foyer. "They're watching again," he said simply. "Enoch sent flowers, no card." Sierra dropped the drive on the table. "Let them watch." Alina stood between them, clutching the folder to her chest. "We can't run from this, and we can't burn it all down without becoming like them." "Then what's the plan?" Sierra asked. Alina's voice was calm. "We expose them, bit by bit, quietly, strategically. We take back what they tried to steal from us. Our choices, our names, our legacy." Marcus stepped forward. "That's war, Alina." She nodded. "Then let's be better soldiers." In that moment, the rain outside grew heavier. The world had shifted. A new war had begun. Not fought with bullets or headlines, but with stories, secrets, and the courage to unearth the rot hidden beneath the surface. They weren't the ones who started it, but they would be the ones to end it. Thank you so much for staying until the very end of this story. It means more than words can say. This wasn't just a tale of twin sisters, deception, and hidden power. It was a story about identity, redemption, and the courage to confront painful truths. If there's one lesson to take from Alina and Sierra's journey, it's this. The truth may hurt, but it also frees us. No matter how dark your past is, no matter how deep the betrayal, there is always a way to rewrite your story with strength, integrity, and love. Now I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your country or city in the comments below. I read every single one, and it always warms my heart to see how far these stories travel. And if this story moved you, inspired you, or even just kept you on the edge of your seat, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps so much and ensures you'll never miss the next story we bring to life. Until next time, stay strong, stay curious, and remember, your story matters.